Life often tests us in ways we cannot see or understand. Most people think the hardest challenges are the loud ones, the battles that crash around us, the obvious obstacles, the painful conflicts. But God's most profound tests are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, invisible, and deeply personal. They come in the form of delays, silence, solitude, and the pressure to remain faithful when no one is watching. These are the seasons where character is forged, faith is refined, and destiny is quietly being shaped. You have faced such a test, and not just any test, but the hardest test of all. A test that asked you to remain obedient without applause, to endure delay without bitterness, to stay aligned when compromise would have been easier, and to trust when understanding was absent. Every moment of discomfort, every unseen struggle, every quiet choice mattered more than you realized. Heaven was watching. Every act of patience, humility, and integrity was recorded and honored. Passing this test was not about surviving, it was about transformation. It was about becoming the person capable of carrying weight, influence, and responsibility in alignment with God's plan. Many stumble when challenged in these ways, but you did not. You emerged refined, faithful, and prepared. And because of that, a shift has taken place. Doors will open differently, opportunities will arrive faster, and your life will begin to move in ways that reflect the trust God has placed in you. This is your story, the story of the hardest test you faced, and how passing it has set you apart as chosen, prepared, and unstoppable. Stay with. Number 1. Your test was silence, not struggle. Most people believe the hardest tests from God come wrapped in chaos, visible battles, loud enemies, dramatic resistance. But your test was different. God didn't overwhelm you with constant struggle. He tested you with silence, no clear signs, no encouraging voices, no immediate confirmation that you were on the right path. Just long stretches of quiet where prayers seem to echo back unanswered. And that kind of test breaks more people than pain ever could. Silence removes the emotional fuel that keeps most people going. There was no applause to motivate you, no reassurance to steady your heart, no visible reward for doing the right thing. You obeyed without feedback. You kept choosing integrity without applause. You stayed faithful without knowing if anyone besides God was watching. That is not a common kind of obedience. That is obedience rooted in conviction, not emotion. In the silence, doubt whispered louder than temptation. You questioned yourself. You wondered if you misunderstood God, if you were waiting for something that would never come. Yet you didn't abandon your values. You didn't rush ahead just to feel something. You didn't create noise to escape the quiet. You learned to sit with God even when He said nothing, and that posture is rare. Silence also stripped away performance. There was no audience to impress, no reactions to measure your worth. What remained was your true heart, who you were when no one validated you and nothing seemed to move. That's where God was shaping you, not as a follower, but as someone He could trust with weight and responsibility. Many fail this test by forcing movement, seeking shortcuts, or compromising just to feel alive again. You didn't. You stayed still when staying still hurt. You waited without becoming resentful. You listened without demanding answers. That's why you passed. Now understand this. Silence was not God's absence. It was His inspection. He was watching how you handled uncertainty, how you treated obedience when it felt unrewarded. And because you remained faithful in the quiet, you are now prepared for a season where your voice, your presence, and your assignment will carry authority. Those who master silence are the ones God speaks through most powerfully. Number 2, you were watched while feeling forgotten. One of the most painful tests God allows is not rejection, but being overlooked. You weren't attacked. You weren't opposed loudly. You were simply ignored. While others were celebrated, promoted, and remembered, you stood in the background, unnoticed, unacknowledged, and uninvited. It felt like erasure, and that is where the test began. Heaven was watching you closely during those moments when it felt like no one else saw you. Angels weren't absent. God wasn't distracted. Every quiet act of obedience, every unseen sacrifice, Every time you chose grace instead of resentment was recorded. The test was never about visibility, it was about humility under invisibility. Anyone can remain faithful when they are praised. Few can do it when they feel forgotten. You weren't just hidden from people, you were hidden from recognition. There were moments you wondered if your efforts mattered, if your prayers were too small, if your presence was insignificant, yet you kept showing up with the same heart. That consistency under obscurity is rare. In being overlooked, your ego was confronted. Pride had no room to grow where applause didn't exist. God was refining your motives, removing the need to be seen, the craving to be acknowledged, the urge to prove yourself. What emerged was a quiet strength, confidence not rooted in attention, but in identity. Many fail here by demanding to be noticed, forcing relevance, or abandoning humility for visibility. You didn't. You served without a spotlight. You loved without credit. You remained grounded while feeling invisible. That restraint marked you. Understand this, being overlooked by people did not mean you were overlooked by God. In fact, the opposite was true. You were being examined for trust. Because those who can carry humility in hidden places can be trusted with honor in visible ones. When God reveals you, it won't be because you demanded it, but because you were ready. Number 3. You passed without becoming bitter. There were moments when bitterness would have been understandable, even justified. You were misunderstood, overlooked, delayed, and wounded in ways few people ever acknowledged. Life handed you reasons to harden your heart, to build emotional walls, to let disappointment turn into cynicism. No one would have blamed you if you did. But this was the test, and you passed it quietly. Bitterness is subtle. It doesn't arrive as anger at first. It comes as disappointment left untreated. It grows when pain goes unanswered and prayers feel delayed. You felt all of it. Yet you made a choice, sometimes daily, sometimes moment by moment, not to let your wounds define you. Instead of becoming sharp, you stayed soft. Instead of closing off, you stayed open. That kind of restraint takes more strength than retaliation ever could. You learned to forgive without receiving apologies, to release people who never explained themselves, to keep your faith intact even when God's timing confused you. That wasn't weakness, it was mastery. You understood, perhaps without words, that bitterness would cost you more than the offense ever did. So you refused to drink from that cup. Remaining tender in a harsh season required discipline. You had to guard your thoughts, correct your inner dialogue, and choose grace when resentment tried to take root. Many people survive hardship but emerge hardened, emotionally distant, spiritually numb. You emerged refined. Your heart stayed teachable, your spirit responsive, your compassion intact. God noticed that, because a bitter heart cannot carry blessing without corrupting it. Authority mixed with resentment becomes destructive, but authority paired with humility and forgiveness becomes healing. God wasn't just protecting your future, He was protecting the people you'll one day influence. Your victory wasn't loud. There was no public celebration for the days you chose mercy over malice. But heaven counted every moment you restrained yourself. That's why you're trusted. You didn't let pain turn you into someone you were never meant to be. And that more than survival was triumph. Number 4. Your delay was a filter, not a punishment. For a long time it felt like life was moving forward for everyone else while you remained paused. Opportunities passed you by. Doors opened for others with less preparation, less depth, less discipline, and quietly the question surfaced. Did I do something wrong? But your delay was never a punishment. It was a filter. God wasn't withholding progress. He was refining alignment. Time became the tool He used to separate what was temporary from what was eternal. People who were only meant for a season fell away. Desires that didn't belong to your future slowly lost their grip. Even versions of yourself that would have collapsed under future pressure were allowed to die. That kind of removal feels like loss, but it's actually mercy. If God had accelerated you too early, you would have arrived carrying weight you weren't meant to sustain, relationships that would later sabotage you, habits that couldn't survive elevation, mindsets that would fracture under responsibility. So he slowed you down, not to frustrate you, but to shield you. Delay became protection disguised as waiting. While nothing seemed to be happening externally, everything was shifting internally. Patience was built, discernment was sharpened, emotional endurance was developed. You learned how to sit with uncertainty without panicking, how to trust God without timelines, how to remain faithful when momentum was absent. Those are not small lessons, they are requirements for what's ahead. Many people mistake delay as denial and abandon the process too early. They force doors open, accept substitutes, or lower their standards just to move. You didn't. You stayed. You waited. You allowed God to do the uncomfortable work of pruning, even when you didn't understand it. Now you can see it more clearly. Had things happened sooner, they would have harmed you. What left had to leave. What didn't come wasn't ready to come. Your delay filtered out disaster you never even saw coming. You weren't being held back, you were being guarded. And because you honored the delay, when movement begins, it won't just be faster, it will be safer, cleaner, and aligned with the future God designed specifically for you. Number 5. You obeyed, even when obedience cost you. Obedience sounds noble until it starts taking things from you, until it asks for more than prayer and belief, until it demands sacrifice. Your obedience didn't come cheap. It cost you relationships you expected to last, comfort you once relied on, and versions of life that felt easier and safer. And still, you chose to do what was right rather than what was convenient. Some people obey God when it benefits them. You obeyed when it hurt, when staying meant losing access, when speaking truth created distance, when walking away left you misunderstood and alone. You felt the cost: immediately emptier rooms, quieter phones, unfamiliar solitude. Yet you didn't negotiate your values to preserve connection. You chose integrity over relief, alignment over acceptance. That decision marked you in the spiritual realm. Because obedience that costs nothing proves nothing. But obedience that requires you to let go of comfort reveals trust at the deepest level. You trusted God enough to believe that what you were losing could not compare to what He was protecting you from or preparing you for. There were moments you questioned yourself, moments you wondered if you were being too rigid, too principled, too willing to lose people. But something inside you refused to betray your conscience. You understood, perhaps without fully realizing it, that compromising now would only delay the inevitable. So you endured the discomfort rather than carry regret. What made this test harder is that the consequences were immediate, but the reward was delayed. You didn't see instant results, no sudden breakthrough, no public affirmation. Just the quiet knowledge that you did the right thing when no one was watching. That kind of obedience matures the soul, God noticed, because those who can obey under loss can be trusted under abundance. If you won't sell your values for comfort, you won't sell your calling for power. That's why this season shaped you so deeply. The relationships that faded were not stolen, they were released. The comfort that disappeared wasn't taken, it was outgrown. And the integrity you protected became your signature. When your next season unfolds, it will be clear. You weren't just obedient. You were chosen because you proved trustworthy when obedience cost you everything familiar. Number 6. You didn't compromise to escape the pain. Pain has a way of making shortcuts look like mercy. When the pressure increased and the waiting stretched on, options appeared: quick exits, easier routes, compromises that promised relief without resistance. They looked reasonable, they sounded logical, some even appeared blessed. But you discerned the difference between opportunity and escape, and you said no. You understood, perhaps instinctively, that not every open door is God's door. Some doors exist to test whether pain will push you out of alignment. You were tempted to bend your values just enough to breathe easier, to accept less than what you were called to, simply to end the discomfort. But you refused to trade long-term purpose for short-term peace. The narrow path isn't narrow because it's cruel, it's narrow because it preserves purity. You chose it when no one would have known if you hadn't. You chose it when compromise would have solved the problem instantly. That decision revealed discipline, not stubbornness. You weren't trying to be difficult, you were trying to remain true. What made this test especially difficult is that the shortcut worked for others. You watched people take easier routes and still succeed. You saw them escape pain while you stayed in it. Yet you didn't allow comparison to corrupt your conviction. You trusted that your path required a different standard because your assignment carried a different weight. Every time you said no to the easy way out, something in you was strengthened, discernment sharpened, character deepened, authority formed quietly beneath the surface. God was sealing something in you, a trust that cannot be granted to those who collapse under pressure. You didn't compromise to escape the pain, and that decision echoed beyond the moment. Because compromise always collects payment later. You chose to pay up front with patience and endurance instead of paying later with regret and loss. That's why your assignment is secure. God knows you won't abandon truth when it becomes inconvenient. And when elevation comes, it will be clean, untouched by shortcuts, uncontaminated by compromise, and anchored in the quiet courage you displayed when no one else was watching. Number 7. Your faith outlasted your understanding. There came a point where logic could no longer support your obedience. The pieces didn't fit. The timing made no sense. The outcome remained hidden. Yet, you kept moving. Not because you understood the plan, but because you trusted the one who gave it. That was the test, and very few pass it. Most people follow God as long as things are explainable, as long as prayers are answered quickly, signs are visible, and direction feels reasonable. But your journey crossed into a place where understanding expired before faith did. You had to choose whether clarity was a requirement or whether trust was enough. You chose trust. You walked forward with unanswered questions. You made decisions without confirmation. You committed to paths that couldn't be defended to others because they couldn't even be fully explained to yourself. And still, you obeyed. That kind of faith isn't emotional, it's anchored. It doesn't rely on feelings, signs, or reassurance. It rests in relationship. There were nights you tried to reason it out, replaying events, searching for meaning. But eventually, you learned to release the need to know why. You stopped demanding explanations and started honoring direction. That surrender didn't make you passive, it made you precise. You learned to move when God said move, even if the destination was unclear. This level of faith is rare because it costs control. It requires letting go of timelines, predictions, and guarantees. It asks you to trust that God sees what you cannot, and that His silence doesn't mean absence, and His delay doesn't mean denial. Heaven responds differently to this kind of faith, because when you trust God beyond logic, you demonstrate maturity beyond circumstance. You show that your faith is not transactional. You're not obeying for answers, rewards, or clarity. You're obeying because you trust His nature, and that is why this faith is rewarded. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but always intentionally. When clarity finally comes, it will come suddenly, and it will make sense all at once. Until then, know this: you didn't wander blindly, you walked faithfully, and faith that outlasts understanding always leads somewhere sacred. Number 8. You learned strength without applause. Some of the most important growth in your life happened where no one could see it. No stage, no audience, no encouragement. Just quiet rooms, private battles, and God working on you in ways applause could never accelerate. You learned strength without validation, and that kind of strength is rare. Most people grow when they are affirmed. You grew when you were unseen. There were no witnesses to your discipline, no one clapping for your restraint, no recognition for the battles you won in silence. Yet you kept showing up. You kept choosing consistency when motivation faded. You kept becoming stronger without anyone noticing the weight you were carrying. In private, God trained you differently. He wasn't shaping a performer, He was shaping a pillar. Applause can inflate ego before character is ready, so He removed the crowd. In the absence of praise, you were forced to confront yourself, your fears, your weaknesses, your motives. That's where real power is formed. You learned how to encourage yourself when no one else did. How to stand firm without external support. How to hear God's voice without confirmation from people. These lessons don't look impressive from the outside, but they build unshakable inner authority. When pressure comes, you won't fold for approval. You've already lived without it. Many people chase visibility before stability. You were given stability before visibility, strength before spotlight, roots before reach. That order matters, because what is built in secret can sustain what is revealed in public. God often hides those he plans to use deeply, not to diminish them, but to mature them. You weren't delayed, you were trained. You weren't ignored, you were protected from premature exposure. Now, when recognition eventually arrives, it won't define you. When praise comes, it won't control you. You learn to stand without it, and that's why you'll be able to carry influence without being consumed by it. Strength formed in private doesn't crumble under pressure, it holds. Number 9. You became the answer you prayed for. There was a time you prayed for relief, for rescue, for change, for God to step in and remove the weight. You asked for doors to open, for pressure to lift, for someone or something to save you from the season you were in. But God answered your prayers in a way you didn't expect. He didn't remove the challenge, he transformed you. Instead of pulling you out, he strengthened you within it. Instead of giving you escape, he built endurance. What you thought was unanswered prayer was actually answered through process. God was making you resilient because what lies ahead requires more than comfort, it requires capacity. Rescue would have helped you survive. Resilience prepared you to lead. Authority isn't given to those who avoid hardship. It's formed in those who learn how to stand in it without collapsing. Every time you thought, I can't do this anymore, yet still showed up, something powerful was forming inside you. You didn't just endure, you adapted, matured, and strengthened. You learned how to regulate your emotions instead of being ruled by them, how to stay grounded when things felt unstable, how to move forward even when fear and uncertainty were present. Those are not survival skills, they are leadership traits. God wasn't just answering your prayers, he was answering the prayers of people you haven't even met yet through you. What you prayed for externally, God built internally. You asked for peace, he gave you self-control. You asked for protection, he gave you discernment. You asked for breakthrough, he gave you authority, and authority changes everything. It doesn't depend on circumstances, it shifts them. Now you carry within you what you once searched for outside yourself. You are no longer waiting to be saved, you are equipped. No longer hoping for escape, you are grounded. You became the answer you once begged for. That's the depth of God's wisdom. He didn't just solve a problem, he shaped a person. And because of that, when you step into your next season, you won't just be delivered, you'll be dependable. You won't just receive blessing, you'll be able to steward it. Number 10. Heaven now responds differently to you. There is a moment quiet, unseen, when heaven shifts its posture toward a person. Not because they asked louder, worked harder, or proved themselves publicly, but because they passed what most fail in private. You've reached that moment. You passed the hardest test the right way, and because of that, heaven now responds to you differently. Before, you were being examined. Now, you are being entrusted. The delays, the silence, the pruning, the resistance, all of it was assessment. God was watching how you handled weight before adding more. And now that you've proven faithful under pressure, movement will no longer crawl. It will accelerate. Not gradually, but decisively. Doors ahead will feel heavier, not because they are difficult to open, but because they carry consequence. What you step into next won't be casual. It will affect others. It will require wisdom, restraint, and maturity. That's why you couldn't arrive here early. Influence without depth collapses. You were given depth first. Responsibility will increase not as punishment, but as privilege. Heaven doesn't place responsibility on those it doesn't trust. You've demonstrated that you won't compromise under pressure, won't grow bitter under delay, won't abandon faith under confusion. That combination is rare, and rarity attracts assignment. You may notice answers coming faster now, alignment forming more quickly, resistance clearing in unexpected ways. That's not coincidence, it's confirmation. Heaven recognizes you as someone who can move with authority without abusing it. But understand this, acceleration doesn't mean ease, it means precision, less margin for error, clearer consequences, greater impact. Yet you're ready. The tests shaped you for this pace. You are no longer being prepared, you are being deployed. What once required endurance will now require discernment. What once built patience will now demand leadership. Heaven responds differently because you are different, trusted, proven, anchored, and as you move forward, it won't just be your life that changes, others will feel the shift too. Conclusion. Passing the hardest test God set before you was not about recognition, reward, or ease. It was about proving that your faith, integrity, and resilience could withstand what most would crumble under. You were tested in silence, overlooked while feeling forgotten, and challenged in ways that demanded obedience without applause. Every delay, every moment of pain, every temptation to compromise was a deliberate part of your refinement. You didn't just survive, you grew stronger, wiser, and more aligned with your divine purpose. You became the answer to the prayers you once whispered in uncertainty. Instead of seeking rescue, God built resilience inside you. Instead of offering escape, He instilled authority, discernment, and patience. You mastered the art of endurance without bitterness, learned humility in invisibility, and trusted beyond understanding. These are not small victories, they are marks of someone who can carry weight without faltering, influence without arrogance, and leadership without compromise. Now, everything changes. Heaven responds differently to you. Doors that once felt closed will swing open. Movement will be faster. Opportunities will be heavier, carrying significance and responsibility. The life you step into is no longer shaped by preparation alone, it is defined by trust. God has proven that you can be relied upon, and the seasons ahead are ready for your presence. You have passed the test the right way. And because of it, you are no longer just a participant in your destiny, you are a vessel of purpose, power, and impact. Your journey has begun anew, and the world will feel the weight of what has been built quietly, faithfully, and without compromise.